Hello and welcome to Graham Hughes' Pubcast. Today I'm joined, although we're not in a pub,
well,
in the Palatine Cafe in Durham.
Early for the pub.
And I'm joined by
Even
Professor Thom Brooks.
Cheers.
Of Durham University. He is the Dean of Law and also Government here in Durham.
That's right.
And we haven't had a chat for a while. Has anything been going on legally in the United Kingdom?
Good Lord.
That we can talk about?
What hasn't been happening right now? We've had, the Prime Minister making an unlawful request to the Queen to suspend our democracy.
So
that was
Boris Johnson lied
one
to the
little
Queen.
thing. I think the last time someone misled the monarch on law, they got in a lot of trouble. This is the kind of stuff that usually is kind of a capital offense in the good old days. I'm glad that those days are over mine. They weren't good, they were old. But
it does seem
incredible.
like the law doesn't matter so much to this government. They don't seem to be too concerned.
Well, they're really pushing the boundaries in a way that is unconscionable in a previous age. You say what one will about the unwritten constitution system that this country has. One of the ways in which it is able to proceed and has been able to flourish for the last few hundred years, relatively without that many problems, has been largely a recognition of various types of conventions about how one acts and what one does. Such as, if you're going to request the monarch to suspend Parliament, it will only be for a couple of days as a mere formality of ending one parliamentary year and starting the new parliamentary year. It's basically get you on your new, so you're going to a new school, get you time to get your new uniform on, your new pencils in your briefcase, and head back into work as if everything is starting off fresh again. But 5 weeks was kind of not just unheard of, but completely unnecessary. Although, of course, it wasn't something that other prime ministers would even countenance. And let alone do in order not to come up with a series of new bills, which largely rehash stuff that we saw from the last sessions of Parliament, or some things already said by his other cabinet ministers recently. So nothing particularly new or gripping in the list of things that he had to produce. I mean, remember, he thought he needed 5 weeks to produce this. And it turns out he didn't. So he had everything ready to go. They need 5 weeks. It was perfectly fine. But it was done. Vague. It was all a bit vague and done in such a way to try to get a result he couldn't get through a vote in Parliament. So if he can't get Parliament to agree to, say, a no-deal Brexit, I know what I'll do. I'll just make sure they don't sit. I can't debate, I can't do anything, and that might be my way of getting things. I mean, that was just surely naughty. And I have to say, we are at Durham University. I am the Dean of the Law School. I'm going to just say stuff like this. Well done, Joe Malm, QC, otherwise known as the guy who won the Scotland case that opened everything up, Durham Law grad.
Joanna Cherry.
And
Gina Miller.
Who are not Durham Law School graduates. That's okay. We all make mistakes in life. But Joe is. And
he went here, did he?
He did, and well done. And he's also,
well
Joe
done,
is also an honorary professor of the law school. I'm very proud of that. Yes, I had something to do with that. And I'm also very happy that Lady Jill Black, second woman to make it to the top court, Trevelyan College, Durham, Durham Law School graduate, part of the, what was it? Was it 11-0, Graham? You're better at numbers than I am.
It was 11-0.
It was 11-0. 11-0 wipeout against the Prime Minister. You couldn't make this stuff up.
And how is he still keeping his job?
Well,
I mean, in any other walk of life, if you actually broke the law,
in any other walk of life,
we're found to have done so by a court of law.
And remember, the UK Supreme Court isn't just any other body. If Boris Johnson gets his way, if the Brexit, movement that he tried to spearhead gets its will, what happens, amongst other things? One of the red lines, one that even Theresa May captured, was the European Court of Justice was not to be the top court of appeal. The top arbiter of British law, according to Boris Johnson and all the people he tries to lead, as it were, is the Supreme Court here. Yet the Supreme Court here tells him 11-0. Sorry, May, you're wrong. And then it's, let's abolish it. Let's have the law lords again.
That's a good idea. Let's have elected lords.
Yeah,
elected judges.
It's
or
just
selected, wasn't it? They wanted the government to be able to have a
they
say.
wanted the government to have a say, like they do in the U.S., so they can arguably
Politicize it.
steer things their way
Yeah.
when they don't like when the law is actually being upheld.
Juicy bit.
Remember that the rule of law, one of our proud British values, is being taught this week, actually, in our schools. Yet our Prime Minister, well, he should maybe pop into a primary school near him. Year 2 is looking at it right now. Little tip to the Prime Minister. I have insider information on this. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, in a bit of delicious irony, you're talking about the way that in the US there's a lot of governmental control over who's in court and who's on the Supreme Court, especially. Now, a Supreme Court justice is made, it's a position for life, like the Pope. And so basically, it's usually reserved for people over the age of 65 because you don't want them to be there forever and ever. Now, the selection that Obama had in 2016 after Anthony Scalia shuffled off this mortal coil, and there was a space because it's dead man's boots, right? And so Obama put forward a candidate who was actually a Republican. And he was seen as a compromise candidate. I've forgotten his name, which is really annoying me now. I don't know if can you remember what his name was?
I want to, but yeah.
This segment would work so much better if I could remember his name. Anyway, he was back-heeled by Mitch McConnell, and the House of Representatives and the Senate said, we're not going to select anyone until a new president is installed, and they will get to choose. They did this so that Trump could get to choose the next member of the Supreme Court, which he did, and he picked someone who's like 55 years old, who's going to be there forever, and he's extreme conservative.
Pause. America has no mandatory retirement age for the judiciary, so in this country there is, in that country there isn't. So in America they hang on until they die. In this country they retire. So Lady Hale, President of the Supreme Court, she's about to retire at the end of this year.
All right, okay, what a way to go. Anyway, the guy who Obama picked looks like he's going to be overseeing the court case against Trump on his taxes.
The delicious irony.
What goes around comes around.
Absolutely. But America has a great number of things wrong. Put aside the issue of judges running for election, where their campaign manifestos might be things like the types of sentences that they'll try to impose, whether or not they're actually appealed by unelected, appointed judges above them who will have to follow the law and dream of being on the Supreme Court, unlike some of the ones at the trial basis. And that's something that's more common in the South and in the West, elected judges. It's not common in the North. It's not necessarily a left versus right thing. There's historical reasons for this. But that's one of the things you see. But the main big feature of American judiciary is the awareness of judges who are not a member of a party. Now, in the United States, joining a party is free. There's no fee. You don't have to pay anything. There's no vetting. The vetting process is you go, ladies and gentlemen, to your town hall, or depending on the size of your town, your post office. You don't have to put your hand on a Bible anymore, but you do have your hand on your heart, or something, swear to a flag that you honorably swear to one party or another, and you have to sign something. Occasionally, they try to talk you out of it. That happened to me. But they didn't work on that. But so you do this, but there's no kind of real process. But the judges are all members of parties, and are very regularly involved in fundraising and political activities.
Right.
And so that's kind of a regular feature. It is not to say that Clarence Thomas and others who made it to the top did it because they were better at drawing a crowd or fundraising than other judges, but it is to say that this is part of the circuit. This is part of that way of life, which makes it very different from Britain. So while there have been judges who have had in their previous lives political affiliations, which is rare, but they have had that, everyone who is on the bench has none. And the overwhelming majority, we're talking on the border of 98, 99%, have never had a political affiliation. Yeah. Many often suspect, closet conservatives, but have never had any kind of clearly identified political affiliation one way or the other. And certainly not knocking on doors, canvassing, recommending people, speaking at rallies and so on. That is the kind of fare you get in the United States, where people, when they're voting for folks, they're not just voting for, say, a certain set of policies, whether it be the big issues in America, abortion, capital punishment, and others, same-sex marriage in some states as well, unbelievably. But they're also hoping to basically subvert or change precedent, change the Constitution, change what the rule of law is. So for all the adherence to rule of law, we have a common rule book, we're going to follow it. Often the American playbook on the judiciary side is trying to meddle with this, and lots of attempts to try to stop this.
So a lot of this stuff is all about trying to meddle with the separation of powers. The idea that you have the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive, and they all check and balance each other and balance each other out. And it's been a bit weird that we were talking earlier in the year about the fact that in America, at least they were having a proper investigation into the Trump president's presidency campaign. And its involvement with Russia. And I think about 200 people were questioned about that. There was dozens of arrests, and several very close people to Trump in that campaign are now in jail as a result.
Right.
However, because of the stupid presidential system, they can't touch the president. And this is something that we see all over the world, and it drives me mad that the UN's attitude, and also the attitude in sort of The Hague as a result, is that you can't stop a guy, and it's always a guy, when he's president. So they can do anything they like. They're pretty much above the law, which annoys me because I believe the Magna Carta in 1215 said no one, not even the king, is above the law. But we have the situation all over the world where you have elected presidents, or elected presidents, depending on the country, who are above the law until they're not in office anymore. So where's the incentive for them to go, oh, well, I'm not going to be president anymore next week, and I'll retire gracefully and end up in The Hague? They'd be like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to end up like Slobodan Milosevic or Charles Taylor. Forget that. I'm going to stay president for the rest of... So I'll change the constitution. I'll kill the opposition.
Trump talks about this, not necessarily killing the opposition, but he certainly talks about extending his term. So, and not just to a second term, but changing the Constitution to match Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who had 4 terms, which brought about the change. That he wants to kind of go on and on and on. Well, there is that small complication.
I'm glad that rule, that 2-term law. So in American law, you can only be president for 8 years.
Now, to be fair, on the other side of things, Roosevelt was also a bit naughty. So one of the things that Roosevelt did on the legal side is he did try to, when the court wasn't always doing what he wanted to, and I mean the U.S. Supreme Court wasn't doing what he wanted it to, wasn't giving him all the outcomes that he was expecting or desiring, he then tried unsuccessfully to increase the number of Supreme Court justices, so they weren't dying at a fast enough rate during his 16 years as president. So I know what I'll do, I'll just have more. And that didn't work. So he was stopped by that. And that's one of many
12,
examples, to be fair.
12.
This is when I'm caught on the spot. No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I feel like it should be an odd number.
It is an odd number.
Okay, it's 9. Okay.
Because if you have an even number, then they're split. Then they can go kind of 10 versus 10. You need to always have an odd number on the bench. And so one of the things. So what's been good, it's one of many examples where people in the United States have said, right, the rule of law matters, there is a common playbook here, we are going to stick to these, and that's where we are. Now, one thing that makes them kind of very different, and we'll bring it back to this country, is in how they understand the different branches of government. So back in the US, you have the separation of powers, this check and balance system. And one thing that makes it very different from here is that the branches are not supposed to be any more powerful than each other. And one of the ways they have a check and balance on each other is they all have effectively an infiltration on each other. So it's the head of the Supreme Court is the one who swears in the president. So you need the Supreme Court effectively to recognize, in a sense, who the president is who comes in. And it's the president who then appoints or nominates people to go stand for the Supreme Court with the approval of the Senate. but these things are all supposed to be relatively equal. And one of the problems that they have in kind of chucking people out in the U.S. system is the kind of very prolonged impeachment process that the Supreme. So this is then kind of given effectively entirely to Congress to do, where it is for the House of Representatives to find him guilty and for the Senate to punish.
Yeah, but also
they will almost certainly find him guilty.
Is it the 25th Amendment to the Constitution about chucking out the president because they're not fit for office for whatever reason? If that happens, then instead of having what they would do in the UK, if an MP was kicked out of office for breaking the law, we'd have a by-election. But in America, the vice president takes over. Nobody votes for a vice president. And secondly, all the people around the president and the vice president are appointees in the executive. There's no one who's elected to office in that particular, which I was just going to say about the difference between the US and the UK. In America, they have got this written constitution, and yes, it resulted in all these arrests, all these people going to jail, quite rightly.
Yes.
But they couldn't touch the actual president, whereas in the UK, where we got this shonky, unwritten gentleman's agreement constitution, which is all based on precedent, isn't it? It's all based on what's come before. It's actually ended up being a lot stronger in being able to curtail what the government was, the madness that the government was planning to carry out, which surprised me actually.
Well, and even more, I mean, people keep sometimes making references back to Watergate. Under Watergate, Nixon had a vice president, Spiro Agnew, from Maryland, and they ran together on a ticket, and they were elected. Well, Spiro Agnew, when everything started to kick off and Nixon started blaming everyone else for corruption and problems and not him, Spiro was the first to go, a name I think largely forgotten in history. And so what Nixon did is he quite literally appointed someone that no one had any vote on at all, I mean literally at all, a guy called Gerald Ford. So Jerry Ford then becomes vice president, never having been on any ticket. He comes in shortly after Nixon resigns and is then given
the presidency.
Well, effectively
the highest office in
because president
the world,
right away.
Arguably.
But then gives an amnesty to Nixon for all crimes known and unknown related to
that's
Watergate.
it. The presidential pardon is passed to the vice president. What a daft system! What an idiotic system!
I didn't create it.
Because if you can, and this is what Trump has looked at, and his advisors like Steve Bannon have looked at and gone, hang on, you can do what the hell you like as president. And so many countries, especially in South America and in Africa and places in Asia that have adopted the American presidential model, have fallen into this trap of corruption because it's so hard to get rid of a president once they're president. And there's no incentive for them to go, oh, do you know what, I'm not going to be president anymore. Because they'll go to jail.
No, fair. No, there is this problem of the incentives, absolutely. The old crazy system of the Electoral College is more or less 100% goes back to pre-Civil War problems between
the post
states.
here in this country is a terrible, terrible system, which means that we are locked in this war between two factions, one of which has gone really far to the left and one of the other one's gone really far to the right. And the centralists like myself are like feeling a little bit politically homeless at the moment because first past the post means that I can push for the Lib Dems, but they're not going to win an election. They're going to have to go in coalition with either Labour or the Conservatives. So it's kind of it's a difficult.
It's a difficult thing here. No, for lots of reasons. No, absolutely right. Now trying to wheel things somewhat back to the UK. Here you do not have checks and balances. You have a separation of powers, but they are not strictly separate, looking after and pushing back against each other like the US. So for example, the sovereignty is within Parliament. Parliament is in control, and government answers to Parliament. The executive answers to Parliament. Now that kind of distinction is something that you normally don't probably think too much about because, well, the government almost always, has a majority, and they can kind of run the show. That's why often people have talked about Parliament being a parliamentary dictatorship, because whoever's got a big majority in Parliament can more or less get away with whatever they want to do in the House of Commons, even if they don't have a majority in the House of Lords, because on a number of things, including especially on things like finance bills, House of Lords, given conventions, looks the other way. Just if the House of Commons says this is the budget, well, guess what? That's the budget. If there's things on campaign manifestos, House of Lords can kick up a bit of a fuss and say, well, we want you to think about this again and vote it down once. Yeah. But if the Commons comes back and says, sorry guys and gals, my lords and my ladies, we really do think this, all right, well, we told them to think about it again, but it's in their manifesto, they are the House of Commons, the government has a majority, the Commons has a priority, unwritten constitution over the Lords, we will bow and defer to that.
Parliament Act 1911.
Thank you very much. No, that's right. And that's seen as one of the bits of the unwritten constitution, that some acts are more equal than others, to use Orwellian speak. So that's a kind of very important thing. Now, that all begins to fall away, it starts to crumble away, when the government doesn't have a majority, and so it's not able to control what's happening anymore.
Like it expelled 21 of its MPs.
Like recently, like the current government. So they're not in control of anything, yet they're bizarrely the government. And the only reason they're hanging on at all is arguably because of worries about a no-deal Brexit, and that the Prime Minister, who has some form in not following the law, as has been shown recently in the Supreme Court, where he was found to unlawfully made a request to the Queen to suspend our democracy. I was asked by CNN, Tom, help our American viewers, I'm paraphrasing, isn't that kind of like really bad to like lie to the Queen about, I don't know, stopping Parliament to get your way? Isn't that like really, really wrong in like a really wrong way? I mean, it's kind of like, is this like beyond treason? Like, it's like shutting the whole thing down. It's like, well, yeah, it's bad. It's really, really bad.
It's like the president shutting down Congress.
It's unique. It's like shutting down and
just to touch on what you said about Watergate. So Watergate, the scandal was in 1973, was it? Was it the 1973?
More or less, yeah, it was.
So it was during the presidential election campaign, and essentially Richard Nixon, the guy who was running for his second term as president,
Tricky Dick.
He paid some people to break into the Watergate Hotel and steal documents on his rival's election campaign so he could find out what he was going to do and get ahead of him. Obviously, this is massively illegal to do. But Trump has taken that one step further. He's called up the premier of another country, of Ukraine, and said, can you dig me up some dirt on my political opponent in the upcoming presidential election next year, Joe Biden? So he's looked at Watergate and gone, I can top that.
What's somewhat different, Graham, sorry for interrupting, is that, because I try not to interrupt, but you don't either, is that Nixon was way ahead at the time. So Nixon was losing at the time, and yet decided to do that, which is absolutely, George McGovern, I think,
was paranoid, wasn't he?
Absolutely paranoid. Whereas Trump is way behind. Now, do we dare speculate? I mean, the Graham Hughes podcast is not known for advocating launching conspiracy theories, but I'm going to put a thought out there. I'm racking my brain. I'm trying to reflect deeply as to why, just after Trump is caught red-handed, making, I can't even think we can say alleged, I think it's pretty much acknowledged now, a request to Ukraine to dig up dirt through its official channels, its espionage, I don't know where, but via the president, leader person, to find dirt on Biden and his son. And that was, very naughty, and all the Watergate parallels. He's just been caught red-handed on this. Clearly a lot of scrutiny on anything coming back the Ukraine channel.
Yeah.
What does he do a week or two later? He pulls the U.S. out of the Kurds to protect the Kurds.
Northern Syria.
He's out of northern Syria. All of a sudden, tells no one in NATO, let alone Turkey, he's doing this. Sends the insane, that's the kindest word I have for it, insane letter to the president of Turkey that has been made public has been baffling people.
I was reading that thinking this has to be a spoof.
But he does this without any warning to his NATO allies, certainly none to the Kurds. Remember, even those who were against the Iraq War, and I marched against the Iraq War, I still obviously think it was a terrible thing. Heck, I was against the first Iraq War, not just the second.
I wasn't against the first. I was only 11, 12 at the time, but actually it finished on my 12th birthday.
Well, this is the week of my 46th, so I feel like we've made a circle here.
But I felt like in that situation, you had a country, a sovereign state, invading another sovereign state, Kuwait, which was a bit of a surprise to the Kuwaitis because they had been propping up Iraq under Saddam Hussein in their war against Iran, because Kuwait is a Sunni Muslim country, whereas Iran is a Shiite Muslim country, so they were sort of helping, back channeling stuff, weapons and things like that to Saddam Hussein. Then suddenly Saddam Hussein turns around and says, right, I'm going to invade Kuwait. No one will care. And obviously all the Allied forces went in on behalf of Kuwait, and they did get the Iraqis back over into their land, into their territory. And once that was done, they didn't continue into Iraq and then take out Saddam Hussein, which was seen by George W. Bush as a mistake, but I don't think that was a mistake. The guy basically did that, and then we've repelled him, we put him back into his box, stay there, okay? And if we're going to get rid of one person from the job of what they're doing, we use international sanctions, means the Hague or whatever to do it. We don't invade a freaking entire nation for one guy, the president, because we don't like the president, the leader.
Well, I'm very weary of various interventions, and that's for another day. But I was against that other conflict, and I'm almost beginning to forget my point. Here it is. So even those who were marching against the war, last one, which may be one thing that we did agree on, that even it was without there's no contesting the horror that was visited on the Kurds by the Iraqis. It was used as a very powerful example by all sides as to, without any doubt, that Saddam Hussein was an absolutely terrible dictator. There was very serious problems that had to be urgently addressed. The disagreement was largely on whether or not there was military means or non-military means to do this. But that something must be done to protect the Kurds. That was something that got everyone together.
Even though northern Iraq is Kurdistan, that area is called Kurdistan.
Yes,
the capital is Erbil. I've been there.
Absolutely, yes, of course you have.
And
read all about it.
That has been an autonomous area since 1991, since the end of the first Iraq War. So using the Kurds as an excuse to go into Iraq, it was a lie to start with, because it wasn't they were desperate in need of emancipation. But then to have the situation where we stir up the pot in the Middle East, resulting in the creation of ISIS, who are like Al-Qaeda on steroids, massacred thousands of people, destroyed historical sites like Palmyra in Syria. And then the very people down on the ground who are going out, risking their lives, finding out where the ISIS bases are, and then radioing in to the allies saying, okay, here's the location of the base, go blow it up with the Kurds.
Now, here, I don't want to launch a conspiracy theory live on your, almost live, on your podcast, but here it comes. What country in the world benefits from America's immediate withdrawal from northern Syria? Which country, which world leader has most wanted this to happen? Without any question of a doubt.
Does it rhyme with Vladimir Putin?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm glad we're on the same page on this.
Yes.
I made a video earlier in the week.
And I think it stands to reason that if Trump had made any advance notice he was doing this, he would see quite the extraordinary backlash, as he's seeing. A bipartisan group. Finally, thank you, Republicans. Finally, the Republicans. Not only did they do the right thing in having the Mueller investigation, which was the right thing for them to support, but the other right thing they've done is they have stood up in the House of Representatives, no reason to do so, besieged minority, or so they perceive themselves right now in Congress. But what did they do? not long, licking their wounds, still kind of healing the scars from mid-election, so on and so forth. They stand up with Nancy Pelosi and they vote to condemn Trump pulling the troops out of northern Syria. Well done to House Republicans. Not many people will say this. I'm very happy to call a spade, and there it is. And there'll be a lot more of that to come. And I think that this will be something that might actually push Senate Republicans to actually take a much firmer line on Trump. If they don't actually punish him by throwing him out, assuming he will be impeached by the House in the next few weeks or months, then I expect that there'll be something else coming his way from that. But I would expect if he had said some advance notice to Britain, to others, Trump would have had hell from them about this. But he chose not to do this, so he wouldn't be talked out of it. There was no chance for them to do this. Why? I would watch very carefully connections between, given what we've seen in the past, given the suspicions, whatever you think about what happened before or what you might think didn't happen before, this is an area of sensitivity. What's going on with Putin and Trump now?
For me as well, it points out another fundamental problem with having a presidency rather than a parliamentary model of democracy.
Sure.
People say democracy doesn't work, and you're like, well, there are lots of different types of democracy, and in Switzerland, for instance, they have one that is very much more about referendums, whereas in the UK we have a monarch, a parliamentary monarchy. The monarchy side of it, we've seen over the summer, the Queen doesn't really have much power. She just does what she's told by Parliament, and that's been the case since Queen Anne in 1707, I think. The Scottish Militia Act was the last time the monarch said no to Parliament. So it hasn't happened for a long time. But in the US, the American president is not just the head of state and head of government. He's also commander-in-chief of the armed forces. So he can pull the troops out of northern Syria without having to ask anybody. Doesn't have to say, hey, can I do this? He can just do it. Also, he can just bomb anywhere he wants. He can actually invade anywhere, and he doesn't have to tell Congress before he does it. He has to tell, I think it's a 2-day window to tell Congress once he's invaded, I don't know, say Grenada or Panama or somewhere. They can then say, we want you to pull the troops out. This was a wrong thing to do, Mr. President. And then the president can say, okay, I'll pull the troops out, and has 6 weeks to pull the troops out. That was a rule brought in during the World War II. And the commander-in-chief thing is something that dates back to George Washington.
Which worked well when you had a general as the president.
Worked well in the 18th century, I mean,
George Washington was a fine general. I feel I should apologize, but I won't, for the revolution. I just came back recently from Philadelphia. I was feeling bits of the American Revolution.
You mean the French proxy war?
Yes. Well, my family did, perhaps unfortunately, fight in the American Revolution on the American side. So there we are. But I've come back. I've made my oath to the Queen. It's all good. We're friends again. There we are. All my ancestors are rolling around in their graves, wondering what the hell I've done. That's fine. I'm the only one to come back. But no, I absolutely agree that there's all kinds of problems with the way the model certainly works. And I think one of the common things said in constitutional law classes about the United States is that America has the world's greatest 18th century constitution.
Yes.
And the problem
That's a really good point.
And the problem is, it's still an 18th century constitution that needs to be.
The UK side of it is, well, it's more fluid and it allows change a lot easier than in America, where it's got to have 2/3 majority, both houses, in order to pass something through as an amendment to the Constitution, which is why the Equal Rights Amendment, which has been bouncing around since 1972 or 3 or something. That only needs to be ratified by about 2 more states, and then it goes through, because it's already gone through the houses, like back in the 70s, and it's had all these extensions put on it, but we're getting a bit technical here. But in the UK, we have the other problem, which is that it's so loose, it's very difficult to say, it's not been codified correctly, and so when things like the prorogation of Parliament for 5 weeks happens, everyone's like, what do? We don't know, because it's not written down.
Well, you're right. I mean, so it's not written down that thou shalt not suspend democracy for 5 weeks to change the law of the land when you can't get a vote in Parliament. That's not written down anywhere. It is an unwritten convention. It can be pointed to. There was, I think there was the case the Supreme Court pointed to going back to the 17th century, noting that there was a long history limiting the powers of the king, the prerogative power. That goes back. This is not anything new, but this is certainly, as it were, when looking for, there's positives of unwritten. There's certainly negatives of unwritten. This is surely one of the many unwritten. One thing I will say about this power, we'll call it imbalance between the different branches. The Supreme Court, in making its ruling, basically found null and void the request the Prime Minister made. And that's what it did. It didn't say, Prime Minister, you got to hop on a plane and go somewhere, or Prime Minister, you're not Prime Minister anymore. It doesn't. It can find things were in accordance with the rule of law. It can find things not in accordance with the rule of law. When it finds things out of sync, then it effectively requires Parliament to set things right. So in this case, something had gone wrong. Parliament was to sit. They didn't say what Parliament should do. They can Brexit all they want. They can go no deal, 100%. That had quite literally nothing at all to do, as far as the court was concerned, certainly on any strict or, I dare say, loose reading of the case. They don't get involved in this because the Supreme Court is actually, in a real way, subordinate to the rest to Parliament. And so when these issues come up about what's constitutional and what's not, it's often kicked back to Parliament where there's an issue for Parliament to resolve, which is very different. So for all those who say, oh my goodness me, we've Americanized, we have this terrible politicized thingamabob, just like the Americans. Not at all.
No.
In America, when Congress or the President can't figure out what they want to do, they send it to the court, and the court decides what the law is. Or, indeed, as it's been accused of many times, changes what the law might be. So abortion rights happen via a privacy law, a case that goes back to the state of my home state of Connecticut, involving the Connecticut state constitution at the time of its being a colony. That becomes the route in doing things. The court finds a way to kind of address this problem where Congress had been divided. Anything similar happening in our court, that wouldn't happen.
No.
It would be sent back to Parliament for Parliament to sort out. So this politicalization that has been accused of the Supreme Court recently is absolutely nonsense.
That was a stunning bit of cognitive dissonance where you had the Brexiters going, this prorogation of Parliament is perfectly reasonable and normal, and it's got nothing to do with Brexit. And then they're told that it was illegal, and they're like, you're trying to stop Brexit.
Exactly.
And you're like, but hang on, you just said that it had nothing to do with Brexit, so...
Well, they were saying it had nothing to do with Brexit, and yet at the same time, if we, but by the way, if we get the Brexit that we want, the people who tell us what the law of the land is our Supreme Court, not Europe. And then when it stopped, wait a minute, someone's trying to stop Brexit, and let's get rid of the Supreme Court.
We don't want the EU telling us what to do. Okay, so we want parliamentary sovereignty, we want sovereignty, parliamentary sovereignty, and then Parliament starts flexing its muscles. It's like, oh, this Parliament's disgraceful, it's full of children, and we've got to get rid of them. And it's like, what do you want? A dictatorship? Is that...
Well, they just want tyranny of not even quite a majority. But that's not a majority right now. We're in favor of Brexit.
Well, today, going back to the law, Joe Mon, alumni of this hallowed university, the third oldest in England. Not the country, England. But Durham University. He's just tweeted today, apparently the withdrawal agreement that Boris Johnson is proposing is illegal because of an amendment put in last year by the ERG.
That's right. And Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean, you couldn't make this stuff up. I mean, it's incredible. And it's specifically around taxation.
Yes.
Now, for all of those watching very carefully, you will know this, but let me help those who are coming to the podcast series for the first time. Joe Mon has made himself a bit of a name as a barrister on Brexit extraordinaire. How does he make a living? He's a tax barrister. And the amendment he's talking about is on taxation.
Oh, brilliant.
This is actually Joe's stomping ground. This is his own pitch. It's taking it back to Old Trafford. As far as, I don't know which team Joe supports. He's from New Zealand originally, so it's a bit confused as to which system Premier
What?
League is
Are you
this
saying
thing.
he's a Johnny Foreigner interfering in our democracy?
Well, English now.
Where was Boris Johnson born?
New York.
Oh, is he a Johnny Foreigner
And
interfering
was
in
an
our
American
democracy?
passport holder.
He could be president of the United States, legally. Because he was born in America?
He could be. He did renounce his citizenship in the last few years, but he can get it back. No, absolutely right. He can get it back. There's also one other thing I think that's important to note about the Supreme Court over here, with all the kind of talk about it becoming, radical and overstepping its mark and all this other stuff like this. A little tiny secret I want to share. Whatever you want to say about members of the Supreme Court, they're not radical, communist, Maoist revolutionaries. I mean, when you get an 11-0 wipeout on something as extraordinary and as big as this, that's harping back to precedents that go back literally of hundreds of years in English, the English stream of constitutional history.
And Scottish law.
And if this doesn't kind of connect with someone, it then makes you wonder, what is this all about?
Oh, it's a religion, isn't it? I mean, that's a whole different pubcast.
Indeed it is. Indeed
Cast.
it is. It's taking it to another level. But it's not really about honoring British values of rule of law, by the way, being talked about in schools this week. It's not really about having the Supreme Court as our supreme arbiter of things. If they, being Boris Johnson and his pals, if they really want to go down the American-like road and politicize Supreme Court to put, as it were, more of their people, let the executive vet people on the Supreme Court, and if people think that's really a good idea, one of the things that happens when you do that is that the status of that Supreme Court changes. So right now, the Supreme Court is independent. It is not partisan. They are not members of the political class, and they are subordinate to Parliament. They do not, they rule on lawfulness, and when Parliament strays, they leave it to Parliament to fix their mess. But if they were to be meddled, interfered with, given a bit of the people impugning on this and not making them a subordinate body anymore, but raising status, if folks don't like an activist Supreme Court telling their Prime Minister what to do, golly gee me, it will be a whole new level of hurt when the Supreme Court begins acting like the American one. If they don't like what they saw right now, which had nothing to do with the U.S., they are going to get a whole new bottle of wallop open up in front of their face when they see a Supreme Court, like in the U.S., with the powers to really make things change, to make laws, to completely change things without any right or much power at all of Congress to do much about it, really tying their hands in a way that is absolutely not the case now. I think those who want parliamentary sovereignty, those who want more flexibility, continued flexibility of Parliament to make laws and to respond to challenges and so on and so forth, and have an independent judiciary appointed separately, they should be hanging on to the current system because things will get worse if they go the other way.
The people who seem to want to give, particularly the proven liar Johnson's cabinet and himself, more powers and the power to overrule the Supreme Court, the power to do this, they don't seem to pick up on the fact that he's not going to be in power forever. And at some point you might have someone who's a hard leftist as Prime Minister of this country with these new powers we've given to Johnson, we're now giving them to this Prime Minister in the future, which they might not be so keen on. So keeping the power levels at manageable, keeping power at a manageable level is what a functioning democracy should be all about. Checks and balances, making sure that people just can't get away with outrageous stuff. And I really feel like the very boundaries, the perimeters of constitutional democracies around the world are really being tested right now. And any kind of leaks are being, people like Dominic Cummings, who's an unelected bureaucrat, who's in contempt of Parliament at the moment for refusing to speak at a select committee on illegal activities that were going on.
From the city of Durham, but not somebody who went here.
He went to Durham School.
He did?
Yeah.
But not to my school.
Private school here in Durham. What? Somebody went to private school in charge of this country?
It's happened before.
Actually, Durham University, isn't it like 60% of the students here are from private?
Not in my school.
Okay.
And before you say
That's
it,
another podcast.
before you say it, Tony Blair was Prime Minister, did go to the school, but he didn't study here. His dad taught here.
Oh, really?
Leo Blair taught criminal law at Durham Law School for years and years. This is his main occupation, was here.
Because Tony Blair was born in Scotland,
And a
wasn't
conservative activist.
he? Wasn't he born in Scotland?
He was, but he was raised in Durham
Yeah, okay.
with his brother and sister,
Ah, right.
who all went to school down the road, and all became barristers.
And Sedgefield, his constituency is just down the road from here as well.
It certainly is.
It's actually in County Durham, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Yeah. So
I will recommend you visit.
Right, before I let you go, because this is supposed to be a shorter podcast today, I just wanted to touch on something that I wanted to just pick your brains about. In the US, they have these things called a class action lawsuit.
Ooh, goodness me, yes.
In which, if you've seen the movie Erin Brockovich, really good example of a class action lawsuit in action. Which is when there was a poisoning, there was a toxic water or gas or something in the town, and thousands of people in the town were affected by it, health-wise, and they brought a lawsuit all together as one, with one person speaking on behalf of the group. We don't have that in the UK, do we?
No, I don't think so. I can't recall off the top of my head anything about it. I'm no expert on this, and it will not be helpful to this podcast right now, but in 3 weeks I'm going to be seeing someone in the Netherlands who is Europe's leading expert on class action lawsuits. So I'll ask her about
please,
this.
can we get together?
I'll ask Yannicka about this.
We have 3 million, the 3 million, who are EU citizens living here.
Yes.
And then we've got about
we
a
have a class
million
action lawsuit.
A million Brits living in the EU 27 countries, who I reckon we could give a mountain of evidence for mental and physical health problems that have been as a result of what they've gone through over the last 3 years of Brexit.
I'm sure people have had suffered in a number of ways. I'm sure
Is that something that we could take to the European Court of Human Rights?
Oh, goodness me.
Not at the beginning, because I think that's a referral court. You can't just take it straight to there. It's got to go to a lower court first.
I will make inquiries.
Okay, let's do it.
That's the best I can do. Yeah.
That's the best news about it.
When one isn't sure, one doesn't give an answer.
Actually seeing someone about...
I'm not sure.
Because one of the things that people get mixed up quite easily, because this is complex
The issue
stuff.
is finding out what the jurisdiction is.
Yeah.
So people have suffered harm, absolutely, and I'm sure they can prove having a variety of ailments and problems.
Breach of their human rights.
Well, I'm sure, and that's been something that has been coming up in various cases, such as British citizens who were living, say, in the Netherlands, who said that they moved over as European citizens. They became European citizens in virtue of their being British, but in having their British citizenship pulled away, can they not continue to enjoy the European citizenship rights? And I think that case didn't go anywhere, but I will check on that.
Okay.
I will check the experts who know this.
I was going to say that one of the things that people get mixed up, they think when we leave the EU, we're also going to be leaving the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights.
We're not. We're still a member.
We're
of that.
not. That predates the EU.
It's
That's
different.
part of the Council of Europe.
I don't make the rules.
Yeah, what you're getting it mixed up with is the ECJ, which is the European Court of Justice, which only rules on EU law, which is why a case like the Prorogation of Parliament, they couldn't take that to the ECJ because it's got nothing to do with the ECJ. They couldn't take it to the European Court of Human Rights. It's got nothing to do with them either because it's not about human rights.
Yeah, they were thinking about the ECJ. Yeah, they were trying to use the ECJ and appeal. Apparently, still looking to EU law as supreme to UK law to get around things to get their way through.
But things like the constitution of a country is not EU law. It's laws that are made in the EU, and
they just. One of the many problems here is there was an idea about, hey, let's do X, without thinking through about how you'd actually do it.
Yeah.
And whatever the other merits of doing it or not are, and there's lots of demerits, I think we're almost entirely agreed on the demerits of Brexit. They haven't really thought through the intricate details about how something might work at all, let alone make it work well. And so this failure to do their homework is really biting everyone involved in the behind. Because things from the Irish border to virtually every other detail, medicines, funding for research, not at forget universities for a second, for science labs that aren't at universities, for general stuff. So many things where airplanes can land. Everything has just not been thought out in any detail. Just, oh, it'll be fine. They really want us to buy their cars. They'll do a deal, which seems to be the line.
Nowhere else in the world makes cars.
But it just, people say, well, listen, that doesn't sound plausible. I think you're wrong. Wait a minute, you're just scaring everybody. Well, turns out, no, it wasn't just kind of trying to scare anyone that it's a bad deal, make us worse off, so boo. It's very complicated. You ain't gonna get there in 2 years or a few extra months. And they still don't seem to have any clear plan. I mean, the best Boris Johnson can do is smile, try to make us forget what happened when he was mayor of London in an incident that's being investigated on 2 different investigations.
That's the Garden Bridge, and also this affair that he had with a woman who he used taxpayers' money to fly around the world with him.
Which is being investigated to see where things are happening or not happening. We're all waiting to see where that leads to. He wants us to forget about this, and his only kind of new thing on the EU is doing what he said, if we believe any of the reports, doing what he said not even a year ago, no conservative government, no conservative leader should ever contemplate, which is having the border in Ireland in the Irish Sea. He said a year ago, it's in video, I think it was at the Conservative Party conference, I might be wrong, but it's a year ago, there's a video clip, look it up on social media. This was, we should never do this, it's a totally bad idea, alienate our DUP colleagues. DUP this morning have said, bad news, Boris. I don't like telling Boris Johnson bad news. All right, I'm lying. I do like telling Boris Johnson bad news. I don't like the guy.
He's not won a single vote in Parliament yet.
And it's not because he's got hair. And when he ruffles it up, he just makes you a little bit more jealous. I got a thing. I wish I had hair too. But bad news, the DUP, Arlene Forster, it seems he can't give him enough money. They are not for it. They are against the deal. The deal will die.
Kieran, the van driver, who's the guy who took me smog down on LBC last year.
And took him down, he did.
I was having a chat with him because he calls me up when he's driving, because he's always driving through France or something. He'll call me up and he went, Graham, and I said, all right, mate. He goes, there's going to be a border down the Irish Sea. I'm like, yeah. He goes, who's going to patrol that?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, who's going to be in the customs? I'm guessing there's going to have to be people from the Republic of Ireland. No, from the Republic of Ireland. And I'm like, yeah, I guess there will be people from the Republic of Ireland there. So he's like, so we've invented a border that doesn't exist between parts of our country, and it's going to be patrolled by foreigners. That doesn't sound like taking back control, does it?
There's no taking back
Sounds
control.
like the opposite of taking control. That's like so what? That's like America, you know, saying
America.
to the Canadians, "Hey guys," they're even better than Mexicans.
Yeah.
Get the Mexicans to patrol the border between New York and New Jersey, and you'd be like, well, why? Why would you? What?
But one other point I'll make on this, and I think you're absolutely right. One other point about this that is if that is a price worth paying, if folks say, look, I don't really care. Put the stupid border there. Let the Irish patrol it. What have you? There'll be an impact on Welsh borders and other things, and so on and so forth. But put all that aside. If that's fine, here's the other sticking point. So, free flow of goods from the Republic of Ireland to Northern Ireland. Free flow of goods from Northern Ireland to the rest of the UK. However, there will be a check on goods from the Republic of Ireland that get into Northern Ireland that then go to Scotland, England, and Wales.
Yeah.
And so to maintain the integrity of the single market. How you do that?
You can't.
It's
impossible. And this is why
I will give a crisp, clean, shiny £1 coin only once to the person who can give me the best answer to that. I don't know how you do in a way that can convince me. I just can't see how you can manage that.
Well, this is why people are pushing for a no deal. So people have got this idea now that they've got the marketing people out, you know, from Saatchi and Saatchi. What's the best psychological word to use? Clean. People like the word clean and purity if they're right wing. Okay, right, we've done studies into this. So let's say it's a clean Brexit. It's not. It's going to be the biggest mess ever because once if we leave with no deal, and that means leaving without a withdrawal agreement, we will still need a deal at some point because the EU is our biggest trading partner. It represents a quarter of the world's entire GDP. It is our nearest geographical trading partner, and you know this thing of economic gravity really does matter. Even if we double our trade with America, the next biggest market, it's still not going to represent as much trade as we have at the moment with the EU. And we have to replicate a lot of that because we're going to lose so much of it when we go to WTO taxes, WTO tariffs, which are effectively trade sanctions against us, against ourselves, which is absolute madness. But they think, okay, well, this will be the end of it. We'll just leave with no deal, and that'll be the end of it. If we leave with no deal, this is just the start of it. And the first thing that the EU is going to say when we say, oh, can we have a trade deal, please? They'll be like, okay, well, sort out the border in Northern Ireland, pay us the 39 billion that you owe, sort out citizens' rights for the EU citizens living in the UK, and also sort out your geographical indicators so you can't make champagne in Surrey. Yes. And then we'll talk.
Well, I think that's right. Those who look to the United States as kind of giving us something glorious, they should be reminded that Donald Trump is a great many things, but he has
to wear great with him.
Well, no. Well, I use it in this sense. He's a great many things. He thinks he's the world's greatest dealmaker, and he ran on a campaign manifesto when he is running for re-election on rebalancing America's trade deficit. That instead of America having a deficit with other countries, America will be selling more abroad, and others will buy more effectively of American goods. He is not shifting things the other way, not willingly. Now, he's not very smart. I do not agree with him that he has got untold wisdom that we haven't seen.
How many bankruptcies did he have?
I've lost count.
11 bankruptcies?
Moses, Elijah, whatever he thinks he is. But he thinks he is that. He is not going to knowingly, in his view, unless he's fooled, sign up to a deal that shifts goods coming from the United States and helps Britain out in its trade deficit with the United States. Not going to happen. So those looking to make a profit from the United States are looking in the wrong country at the wrong time. But looking again to the European Union, these things take what, an average of 5, 6, 7 years? Let me give you some other bad news. If it's taken this long for the British government to decide, and to decide its infinite wisdom, that what does Brexit mean? Oh, I don't know. Do we have to have a border? Well, maybe, I don't know, put something in the sea. That's as far as they can go as to, there isn't one new human right they want to have different from the European Union. There's no one workers' right. They would have extra on the European Union. They don't say one human right or workers' rights that they wouldn't have that we currently enjoy from the European Union. What would exactly be different? Oh, I don't know. There wouldn't be trade tariffs with EU stuff. Well, there aren't trade tariffs with EU stuff. We'd have better trade deals elsewhere. Like with where? Countries the EU already has trade deals with that Britain would want to have, I don't know, the same deals with. Now, if Britain can't decide 2.5, 3 years in what Brexit means to withdraw, what will be the new terms of trade it will want if it did withdraw? Well, I think we haven't seen, any beginning of thinking around that. So I think you could easily see, ladies and gentlemen, conservatively, I'm using the word conservative now, conservatively, I think it's easy 5 years before there is even the beginning of thinking around what the vision is for starting to get trade deals before they start earnestly sitting at the table and having trade deals. For all those to say, look, Britain and the EU are so close anyway, it will be so close, so after the withdrawal, it'll be fairly easy. Well, they're then saying, effect, Britain isn't really leaving the European Union at all.
Yeah.
And Brexit is just a smokescreen. It's just a waving of the hand. We're really in, but we're not. We'll just call ourselves Norway. If something more than Norway is genuinely meant by leaving and it's really to be substantial, then it's not a waving of the hand. There'll be a substantial departure, but what that substantial departure is, the government has yet to inform the rest of us what that might be, other than, I don't know, we'll be on our own feet or something. But at the moment, that doesn't even seem true.
Country that imports 50% of its food. My grandfather was in the Royal Navy from 39 to 45, and his job was basically helping the convoys coming across, from the Americas with food for the United Kingdom and arms and other things, but mostly food, because even in 1941, we couldn't feed ourselves. We were reliant on food coming in from elsewhere. And to think now, when our population's much bigger and we've got so much more integration around the world, transportation, suddenly we're going to turn around and we're just going to grow our own. It's absolute nonsense from top to bottom. And it is a romantic ideal. And the whole of Brexit is this. When we get down to the nitty-gritty, the legal aspects of it, the technical aspects, the trade aspects, it all just falls apart like trying to pick up spaghetti with your bare hands. It's just
How many Brexiteers have started a tomato patch since the referendum vote? Who started growing for Britain since the referendum?
But even if you did it, you can't feed a family of 4.
I'm sure there'll be comments.
What you can grow on a single allotment, it just, unless you're going back to the conditions that the Irish were under in the 1840s, in which, because of the British landowners and because of the inheritance law as well over there at the time, you had these tiny little small holdings, and they could only grow potatoes. You had people whose diet consisted of potatoes and water. And I'd like to remind anyone watching this that just a few weeks ago there was a story in the news about a kid who had gone blind from just eating chips and crisps. Wow. That's all he ate, and he went blind because of the deficiencies of the nutrition he was getting. The idea we can stand on our own 2 feet is it's so naive. It's like something a child would think. It's like thinking that a lake exists to give an animal somewhere to drink, do you know what I mean? Rather than it actually because of the water system and rain and things like that. There's a scientific reason for that lake to be there.
Made well.
It's not there for the donkey to have a drink from. To think that is just so childish. And yet here we are. We have over half the country who are still absolutely entranced and in love with this idea of giving the EU the old 2 fingers and standing on our own 2 feet. But then again, they've been lied to for the last 30 years by the tabloid newspapers and by politicians and by pundits on the TV. One of the biggest failings, I think, not just of the political side of things that we've seen over the last few years, has been just an absolute derogation of responsibility by the journalists in this country, especially people who are this idea that impartiality is the same as false equivalence. You know, you've got to be impartial. So if you have someone who is a scientist explaining the science behind climate change, we also have to have someone who doesn't believe climate change is actually happening.
Yeah, I think it's been bad. I think it's frankly been particularly bad at the BBC. I've been particularly upset with their coverage. And you see, I mean, we're almost at the end of our time, so I'll make this kind of a last point. But one of many examples of this is so the government comes up with a new raft of stuff it wants to do. And yet again, we have presented to us the government wanting to start a points-based immigration system. This is one of the things that gets me very excited as immigration law specialist guy. But there's been one for over 10 years. I know there's a points-based immigration system, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know why? Because that's how I got here. I got in on the points-based immigration system. I know it's there. Look it up. Type points-based immigration system Home Office, and you can go and you can see how many points you get going through Tier 1, Tier 2, and so on. That this is like a new thing. I take the point, yeah, sure, absolutely right. It doesn't extend to EU citizens. There's nothing to kind of launch. There's nothing to start. There might be something to kind of include folks in. It's already been designed. Yes, it's Australian-inspired. Ask Tony Blair about it. Tony Blair did it. You know, for all those people out there thinking this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, if only we had a points system from Australia, we would rule the world again. We'd ride the waves and so on. And we need the Conservatives to do it. Well, look, I hate to tell you this, but Tony Blair may well be your man, because Tony Blair is a guy who actually pulled it off. He did it. Charles Clark was Home Secretary. I'm just calling him out. You know, he's the one who wrote it up, and it's there in black and white. I don't like them. They're overly complex. Ours, unlike the Australian one, is not designed to increase migration. It has a cap. On it, it's very weird, and it's led to a number of mistakes, a number of problems in people making their applications. But putting all these things to the side, the political journalists just spit stuff out that the government tells them, well, we're going to do an Australian-based thing. Journalists either don't have the time or the interest to challenge or think about what the government's saying to them. So I see yet another thing about we're going to start this, and there's literally no other side of the story. Just they want to do this. It is this great, and it'll be just like Australia. If someone from Australia says, I'm from Australia and I like it, and there's no kind of thought, sense. What is the other side? How do these things work? What is the problems with a system like this? Why has it been recommended to government to not have a points-based system in various consultations that I've been a part of, amongst many others? None of this gets aired or thought about. Never on the BBC, and to be fair, not really with much else on other broadcasters either. I think it's fairly shameful. Whether or not this is out of ignorance, whether this is out of a specific decision, BBC worried about its license fee, what the government will do, I don't know. But it's certainly a real problem that political journalists are not what they used to be. We long for the days of Paxman.
Right, he's still presenting University Challenge, so we can learn something that way.
At least that.
But no, it has been a little bit of a disgrace. Okay, so we've covered a lot of stuff today. We didn't get onto Corbyn and the Labour Party, which I wanted to talk about, but we'll do that another time. We'll do that another time.
Yes,
that's another debate.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. And until next time, grab your cup and we'll just say, here's to the EU.
There we go.